Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Hawk Blogger. And today is the start of something new, a little bit of a difference. I had this choice to make of whether or not I was going to break the streak of how many shows, how many days in a row of going live and recording new content. Was I going to stop it because I'm off on a trip with my family? We're road tripping, rented an RV. We're doing things we've never done and going to see how it all goes. But I did not want to be recording shows on the trip. I want to be fully present with the family and enjoying our trip. So I thought about just ending the streak, which was an option. But the other option was I could do some double duty before I left, record some episodes, and have them premiere each day while I'm gone. So you will get, hopefully, some content each and every day. We'll keep the streak alive. Technically, I won't be live because these are pre-recorded, but at least you will get new content every day while I'm gone. Keep the streak going in that sense, and hopefully that is great for you. I expect that these will be, I can almost sure to tell you that these will be shorter. They might be 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and maybe that's cool. Maybe that's a nice length of time for you to get your Hawk Blogger morning cup of coffee, and then away you go. One of the topics that I wanted to cover, and something that I've been thinking about for a little while, and the one I'm going to cover in this episode today, is what are some of the lessons that we can learn from past Seahawks teams and past teams in general that could help us learn what's going to be necessary for this Seahawks team to return to being one of the best in the NFL, which they haven't been for a little while. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about today was we've had these conversations about, okay, could this offense become a top 5 unit? Could this defense become a top 15 unit? And maybe they both become top 10 units. And is that, that'd be great, like awesome. So the Seahawks would be really good. Well, one of the things that I think is less understood and something I have to remind myself is if you want to be not just good, but you want to win a ring, which I certainly want another one. I know all of you want another one, and I'm sure everyone in that VMAC building wants another one. It's not good enough to be top 5 in something. It's not good enough to be top 10 in something. You have to be the best team in the NFL at something. And usually you have to have a player or players who are best in the NFL at what they're doing. And to illustrate this point to start with, I actually want to do something that almost no one seems to do anymore, which is refer to the Seahawks' first Super Bowl team in 2005, as opposed to the Legion of Boom team that was, I think, everybody very familiar with. And some of you, I think, are probably pretty familiar with the 2005 squad as well. But I want to kind of go back to that group and share some of the lessons there as well, because what I think people forget in all the conversation about the Legion of Boom is that 2005 Seahawks team, they weren't top 5 in the NFL in scoring. They weren't top 5 in the NFL in yards per play. They were number 1. They were the number 1 scoring team in the NFL by a decent margin. They scored 13 more points than the next closest team. It's not like they had a huge margin, but they're 13 more points than Peyton Manning's Indianapolis Colts. They averaged the most yards per play of any team in the NFL at 5.8 yards per play. And I think that that's something that people don't remember as much. They remember Walter Jones and Steve Hutchinson and Matt Hasselbeck and certainly I'll talk about Sean Alexander in a second, but I think they forget just how potent that offense was. When they got moving, it was something. It was a sight to behold. that offense, once it started clicking, they were hard to stop. They had a lot of answers. They had Mike Holmgren calling plays. They had maybe the best offensive line in football, I think is a fair guess there. And they also were good at some other things, which we'll talk about in another show. But for this, I just wanted to first call out they were the number one scoring offense in the NFL and the number one efficiency offense from a yards per play perspective in the NFL back in 2005. And I wanted to go back and see if I could find old DVOA. We'll see if it allows me to do this or not. Maybe it doesn't. That's a shame. DVOA. Historical DVOA. Let's see if I can find it here. In any event, so again, the best at something there. And then if you look as well defensively for the Seahawks, there were some things there that stood out, and they weren't necessarily, you don't have to be the best at everything, but there were some things that the Seahawks defense did that was better than people realized. That was not the most talented defense, but when you had the number one scoring offense, the Seahawks also had the number 7 scoring defense. And from an overall efficiency standpoint, they were able to put something together that was pretty darn good. Now, there was this other aspect to that Seahawks defense that I'm trying to look up while I have it here. Yes. So the Seahawks were the number 2 red zone defense in the NFL that year. Only the Chicago Bears with Brian Urlacher and that whole crew were better than the Seahawks at keeping people from scoring touchdowns once they got to the red zone. They only had 19 touchdowns in 47 red zone attempts, 40%. That is excellent red zone defense. And it was something that allowed them to, while they gave up some yards, when it came down to it, they were able to hold down teams in the red zone. And so you don't have to be the best defense overall, but this was something they were able to kind of hang their hats on. And when push came to shove, they were able to keep teams from scoring. And there was another piece here, and I don't know if I can find this one or not, but I mean, I remember from that year some of the key turnovers. That was a big play Babs year for sure. Was big play Jordan Babineau and some of what he contributed to that defense. And they just had some really key turnovers at really key points. And so that was another piece that I think just stood out about that defense. But then obviously the other part of this was Shaun Alexander. He wasn't just the leading rusher. He wasn't even just the leading scorer. He broke the NFL record for the most touchdowns ever that year. He was the MVP and the offensive player of the year. He was the best offensive player in football for that season. And this all might be like, oh yeah, no kidding. I mean, that's obvious. But I think it matters because what we're looking for is we're not just looking to get better. We're looking for someone and something that can be the best that anyone does it in the NFL. And so I want to talk about in a second, like what are some examples of what could potentially be that for this Seahawks team. But just to give you a reminder, Shaun Alexander actually only won the rushing title by 20 yards that year. And he had 1,880 yards. Tiki Barber was right behind him with 1,860 yards. A little bit of a difference on the touchdown side. Sean Alexander had 27 touchdowns rushing. I think he also had one receiving. Let me double check that, because I thought he had 28 touchdowns, but maybe I am wrong. No, I was right. He had 28 touchdowns total. And Tiki Barber had 9. Larry Johnson, name from the past. He was third in the NFL rushing. He had 20 touchdowns, which was also a remarkable year there, and a forgotten year given what Sean Alexander did in his time. So Sean Alexander that year, let's do a quick reliving of his games that season. How many games did he have that he was over 100 yards rushing? What's your guess? Out of 16 games, this is the 16 game schedule. How many games did he have over 100 yards rushing? I'm counting them up now. 11 games. Make sure I got this right. 2, 3. Yes, 11 out of the 16 games he went over 100 yards. One of the games where he was under 100, he was at 98. So, pretty much 12 out of 16 games, he was over 100 yards. By comparison, let's take a look at where Kenneth Walker was last season as the Seahawks rusher. Kenneth Walker had, in 17 games, he had 905 yards. So he had half as many yards as Sean Alexander in, extra games, although Kenneth Walker did miss a game last year. How many games do you think Kenneth Walker went over 100 yards rushing last year? Take a guess. If Sean Alexander was 11 out of 16, how many did Kenneth Walker go over 100 yards last year in 17 games? Well, technically for him, it was 15 games because he was out for 2. One game. He had one game over 100 yards rushing the entire season last year, and that was just 105 yards in week 6. So for a room that we've talked about from George Fant and Ryan Grubb and other places talking about how strong this running back room is, I don't think we have been particularly close to really seeing what they're capable of, or that they're truly special and not just above average. But I think it's a good juxtaposition there of, Kenneth Walker. Where did he finish in the list of individual rushers last year? How many, if he ended up with 905 yards, where do you think that ranked of all the running backs in the NFL? Was it top 10, top 15? It was barely top 20. He finished 19th in the NFL in total rushing yards. And if you go to yards per game, he climbs a little bit to 17th in the NFL at 60 yards per game. But still, that is a far cry from being the best in the NFL. Would you be surprised to hear that Kyren Williams of the Rams led the NFL last year in yards per game rushing with 95 yards per game? Christian McCaffrey was at 91. Kyren was at 95. And worth knowing, James Conner was third at 80. So the top 3 running backs in the entire NFL in rushing yards per game were all in the NFC West, and none of them were Seahawks. And so you had the top 3 and then the 17th in Kenneth Walker. So some of it, you could say, oh, well, maybe he had less carries per game. Maybe. He had more carries than James Conner, and more carries. He had essentially the same amount of carries as Kyren Williams. So I don't think it's just that simple. Like, Zach Charbonnet certainly took some carries, but Kenneth Walker's got a long way to go if he's even in the conversation for being one of the best backs in football. But getting back to this again, I think part of my point is I've already gone over a few ways that the 2005 squad was not just top 5, but the best, or like top 2 in the sense. So let's go over it again. Top scoring offense, top offense in terms of yards per play in the entire NFL. So 2 very good ways of kind of measuring an offense. Defense, second in the NFL in red zone defense. And then you have arguably the best left tackle in the NFL, maybe the best left tackle to ever play, the best left guard in the NFL in Steve Hutchinson. You had the MVP of the league overall, having his best season in the NFL overall. And you put all that together and you've got a team that really had some clear strengths to build on when trying to contend with the best of the best to win a Super Bowl. I will quickly talk about the 2013 Seahawks as well, and the 2014 Seahawks. That one's a little bit more well-known, right? So if you go to the 2013 crew, they ranked number 1 in the NFL in scoring defense. They ranked number 1 in the NFL in yards allowed. They ranked number 1 in the NFL in yards per play. They ranked number 1 in the NFL in turnovers on defense. They ranked number 1 in the NFL in passing yards against, number 1 in interceptions, number 1 in yards per attempt. And then on offense, they also ranked number 1 in terms of rushing touchdowns against. They ranked number 1 in turnovers forced. So there's a number of things that they weren't just good, they were the best in all of football at. Meanwhile, their offense, which is lesser known, was also good, but like similar to the Seahawks. Think about it again. 2005, number 1 scoring offense, number 7 scoring defense. Well, 2013, number 1 scoring defense, number 8 scoring offense. So there might be something too, if you can add your 2 numbers together of scoring offense and defense, and they add up to something less than 10, you have a pretty good chance of being a Super Bowl contender. They also were the 4th best team in protecting the football. They had the 4th fewest turnovers in the NFL on offense. So you had the number 1 turnover defense forcing them, and the number 4 best offense in limiting turnovers. So they really restricted other teams' additional opportunities to beat them. I think turnovers is another thing. We'll potentially go into that another day. Other things that team was good at, they were 4th in the NFL in rushing offense. And so that was their kind of thing that they hung their hat on, was being a strong running team. They were only 26th in passing offense. So, they did rank 10th in passing touchdowns, but still, it was primarily a run-centric team. And they were darn good at it. And that offense, by the way, was 5th in the NFL in percentage of drives that resulted in points. And the Seahawks defense was number 1 in the NFL in limiting points, percentage of drives that resulted in points. Only 24% of drives against that 2013 Seahawks squad resulted in points, which is pretty remarkable. So, and I could go on, that the Seahawks also had the number 1 special teams unit in the NFL in 2013. So there was pieces of that that played a role. There was just a number like that team had number one things about it all over the place, right? You could say they had the best cornerback in football, depending on how you feel about Darrell Revis. The best safeties. They had a bunch of things that were the best, not just top five, but the best. And so I think when we kind of reflect this back to our current Seahawks team, what are or who are the potential parts of this team that can be the best? Well, let's go back and look at 2013 and this Seahawks team and where they ranked. Like, what was the closest thing to being the best at something? Well, certainly wasn't scoring offense or scoring defense. They ranked 17th and 25th in those two numbers. It wasn't yards. They were 21st and 30th. They're nowhere close on those. There is, all right, hold on. I'm going to try to pull this up real quick. Boop, 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 boop. Here it is. They were 10th in yards per play. So there's something there. They were 12th in yards per drive and 12th in points per drive. They were 11th in percentage of their drives that resulted in points on offense. There isn't a lot. There isn't a lot that jumps out with this Seahawks team of being close to the best. The things that you could kind of see are things like there have been times where Geno Smith has been the top rated passer for periods of time for 6, 7, 8 games, like the last 6 games of the season. First down, the Seahawks were the top first down offense in the league last year. So that's something we could talk about. In fact, why don't I pull that up for a second? I believe they were even in the first 2 downs. If not the top offense, they were close to it. They were 4th for the top 2 downs. Their offense was 4th among all NFL by EPA, if you look at it that way. And they were number 2 in dropback EPA. So first 2 downs of every series, the Seahawks were the second best passing offense in football last year. So I think if you kind of you step back for a second, you look at the Seahawks team, you kind of think, all right, this passing offense has some of the best players, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Jackson Smith and Jigba. You've got a quarterback who has been excellent at times, but not consistently so. You've got Ryan Grubb coming in, who is someone who really made a passing offense sing at University of Washington. So is it realistic for the Seahawks to potentially be the best passing offense in the NFL? It feels even silly to say that, knowing that Patrick Mahomes walks this earth with Andy Reid on the sidelines, right? Like, I don't know if that really is realistic. But the fact of the matter is they were better than Kansas City in that regard, at least in the first 2 downs by a long stretch. The Chiefs are the 14th ranked team in passing EPA on early downs last year. It was the 49ers that were number 1 and the Seahawks that were number 2 and the Bills that were number 3. So I don't think it's crazy that the Seahawks could end up being in that conversation. I think that they've got enough going for them that they could be in that conversation. And if not this year, then, you strengthen that offensive line with one more quality starter in 2025, then yeah, maybe you start having that. So I think that's one piece that stands out to me. Another is I think this team could potentially lead the league in turnovers. And some of that's based off of what I've observed from Mike McDonald and his scheme and the amount of turnovers that his teams forced even before Roquan Smith was acquired for Baltimore was silly. I mean, like a really silly amount of turnovers. He confuses teams a lot and quarterbacks a lot. And I think that they've got the types of playmakers that can take the ball away. Even though Reek Woolen stepped back in that regard last year, he is still a good player. He's good at making plays on the football. Devin Witherspoon, we know, is good at making plays on the football. I think Trey Brown showed last year he is good at making plays on the football. And that's not even including some of the safeties that are coming into the fold there. And Jerome Baker, who has at times been someone who can pick off a pass here or there. So I think with the increased pass rush, I think the Seahawks, that is something else, some other thing I should bring up. The Seahawks were, let me bring that up on defense, I believe near the top in not just sacks, but in pressure. So the Seahawks ranked 12th in sacks last year. And where is the pressure rate? Advanced stats. I believe that they were pretty high up in that number as well. If I can just find it. All right, here we go. Pressure rate. Yeah, the Seahawks were 9th in pressure rate in the NFL. So I think it's realistic that the Seahawks could be the best pass rushing team in the NFL. If everything goes right with this Byron Murphy selection, with Leonard Williams, Boye Mafe taking a step forward, Uchenna Nwosu back. Who knows what they finally figure out with Darrell Taylor, Draymond Jones. Jerome Baker has been one of the best sacking, off-ball linebackers, blitzers. Devin Witherspoon is an excellent blitzer. I think that there's, Rayshon Jenkins has shown some ability there. I do think it's possible the Seahawks could be the best pass rushing team in the NFL as soon as 2024. I don't think that's crazy. So I think that is a question that we should all be reflecting on is what is something that this team can be the best at? And then who are the players who are capable of potentially being the best at their position? And I think we've already got some guys in that list. Devin Witherspoon should definitely be on that list. I think Tariq Woolen still belongs on that list. I think that Byron Murphy hopefully will show that he belongs in that conversation. Maybe not as a rookie, but he'll show enough as a rookie to think, okay, this guy is going to develop into something like that. Might sound silly, but Charles Cross has the youth. He's only 23 years old. He came into the league at 21. He is younger than a number of the rookies that are coming into the NFL right now. And who knows with Scott Huff? Who knows with his increased focus on his strength? Can he make a significant jump up into being one of the best left tackles in football? Let's hope so. That would be great. Abe Lucas maybe could be the best right tackle in the NFL. Maybe in the conversation. He certainly has to show that he can stay healthy. I think Kenneth Walker has it in him to be in that conversation at the running back spot. I do. I think he's got it in him. I think the offensive line is going to have to help, and I think the scheme is going to have to help. But I think that he could be in that conversation. I don't know if JSN has what it takes to be that. I think DK Metcalf, he might have a season of that in him. I'm not sure if he has it in him to be the best receiver in football. I haven't seen that from him yet, but he certainly has the physical talents to do that. So, I mean, there's definitely some candidates there on both sides of the ball that have the chance to be the best at their positions in the NFL. All right, everybody. That is it for today's episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I hope you enjoyed it. I will be back tomorrow. And until then, I'm Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Hawk Blogger. This has been another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings.